Before we begin, since this is a BBC-owned property, I feel the need to point out that the news arm of the BBC has a continuing issue with transphobic leanings in its news coverage. You can find in a pinned comment below various videos from both myself and other YouTubers covering this issue. And while I understand that the Doctor Who creative team is not responsible for this, I will continue to point this out for as long as it remains a consistent issue. Thank you. What? David Tennant is back. We knew that was happening. What was speculated about but was not certain that we now know is that he's the 14th Doctor now? So I kind of touched on this a little bit in my review of The Power of the Doctor. And I kind of just breezed over the fact that on paper, and I have in the past actually said that I think this is a terrible idea to have the Doctor regenerate literally into an old actor. But I was a lot more okay with it than I expected to be. That is not without caveats, and I kind of want to dive into that a little bit more here. Firstly, I suppose a little history. As I said, I've gone on record saying that this is a terrible idea, and I'm not even necessarily going to walk that back. I do think it is an idea that is very fraught, and even if this is ultimately well executed, I think there are going to be some negative ripple effects of having made this decision that is just not going to be in the best interest of the health of the show or the fandom overall. But I don't think it's going to be as much of a death blow as I was certain back when I said the show should never, ever do this. And that is what I said. I literally had a video that was 4 things Doctor Who should never do. This, I think this was even my top one. So yeah, I've been pretty adamant about this in the past. And I didn't talk about it as a possibility leading up to The Power of the Doctor because honestly, as much as I saw other people speculating that she was going to literally regenerate into Tennant, I didn't believe it. I didn't think that that was going to happen. And so I didn't want to indulge the idea because I knew that for all the people who just went, oh, that's a neat rumor, I heard about that, or people who were just excited because they really liked Tennant, there were also people who really basically just wanted to act like, see, this is an admission of the failure of Whittaker. They literally had her regenerate into a much better Doctor. See, we were right. She was never my Doctor. And I just don't want to engage with those people anymore. But, that's now what has happened. So yeah, I do need to deal with it. Why don't I back up and talk about what my issues have been with the general core concept of bringing back an old Doctor. Firstly, I feel like it's the kind of move that feels very retrograde. It feels reactionary and it feels like, well, it just feels a bit wanky. It feels like something that a show that is more interested in its past glory than charting a new path would do. It's actually a fairly sizable part of why I didn't have a lot of interest in a lot of what Star Trek was doing for a while, because for decades, actually, after Voyager, everything was either a reboot or set in an earlier part in the timeline. The franchise refused to move forward. It was only interested in looking back in some way, shape, or form. And I just don't really have a lot of interest in that. Now, like I readily admit, sometimes your best days are behind you. Sometimes charting the future path will not get it to be as good as it was. But I just think it's creatively healthier for a property to continue to move forward than to start to become masturbatory in this sort of, oh, remember the glory days? Let's bring that back. And like Doctor Who is already susceptible to that in certain ways in terms of bringing back old villains or even bringing back old Doctors for multi-Doctor style stuff. That's already in there. I didn't want to see that to become so ingrained that we literally brought back an old Doctor. And the other thing is that it's the kind of thing, and this is actually part of the reason why I was very nervous going into the multiverse with Marvel, and I'm pretty confident Marvel is not going to go there at all with this. But one of the reasons I was really terrified of that idea was like, oh crap, are they going to use that to bring back dead characters? Are we going to get like a new Tony Stark, even if it's not Robert Downey Jr.? Because, oh, this one's from another universe. Or even if they don't, fans are going to ask them to do that, to bring back things that the franchise moved on from, because now there is a mechanism by which to do that. And thankfully that hasn't happened with the MCU, but they're now breaking that seal with Doctor Who. And the precedent has been set. We can go back to an old Doctor. And I don't like that precedent has been set. That precedent has been hinted at previously with Day of the Doctor and Tom Baker's appearance, but it was only hinted there. To actually do it, to actually have the audience watch the Doctor become someone who has already been in the part before, that just feels like it invites all the more demanding and oftentimes toxic infighting and screaming and demands from some aspects of the Doctor Who fandom. Because they're going to point to this and go, you gave us what we wanted once, now we want to demand more. Or after Tennant leaves, and if they don't like Ncuti Gatwa, maybe some of these people are going to start shouting, well, bring back Matt Smith. We know you can now. So I just don't like that in terms of its impact on the fandom and how it impacts the way they think about this property and the way they approach it. I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it's healthy for the state of a property overall. And I still hold to most of that. And yet, I am not really angry right now. I'm not going to say it's all good and it's going to be great. I don't know that. What I'm in right now is something of a holding pattern, which is that I can see, given some of the things we have set up and some of the pieces that are in place and some of the ways this is being approached, how Russell T. Davies may well have found a way to do what I still think is a very bad idea in a way that I couldn't think to do it, that actually resolves a lot of my issues. And honestly, first of all, I love when that happens. I love when a show, a film series, a comic book, some property is able to take something that I look at and go, that's a really bad idea, and make something amazing with it. Whether it's, at a basic core concept level, something like the Lego movie, that's a terrible idea. That's a really good movie. Or whether it be something like what She-Ra and the Princesses of Power was able to do with its 5th season. I said prior to that, they cannot try and redeem Catra. It's not going to work. It's going to be really damaging as a message if they try, but it succeeded because they went at it in a way that I just assumed they wouldn't do. I assumed they would try and redeem her in a moment, like she's made the switch. No, they instead dedicated a massive swath of time and huge chunks of the 5th season into showing how much work was involved in that.
I'm sorry, I got angry. It's something I'm working on. Oh, you are? Yes! Now can you please? Yes.
Basically proving that they were smarter than me. I want writers who are smarter than me. I have a slightly inflated opinion of my own intelligence, but I want writers who will think of stuff I didn't think of, especially if they can use those ideas to take an idea that I don't think could possibly work and make it work in ways I couldn't imagine. I love that. And I don't know for certain if that's what's going to happen with Tennant, but I see the pieces where it could. Here's what I mean about that. First is, right off the bat, this regeneration is established immediately as weird and anomalous.
What?
And something's wrong. A lot of people have decided to sort of riff and latch on to the idea of the Doctor's clothing regenerating. I don't have too much thought on that. Some people will cite, well, that actually happened with the first regeneration from the first Doctor into the second. Production-wise, that's because it was the first regeneration. They hadn't fully figured out how it worked yet. There are others who think it's an error or what have you. But I think it's on purpose. And I think it actually means something. Not like deep, let's get out the conspiracy board meaning, but I think it's one more thing that is meant to add to the fact that something is off and wrong, and this is not what should have happened. So the fact that the clothes regenerate as well, the fact that the outfit is not a match for any outfit we've seen Tennant in before that. It's incredibly reminiscent of Tennant's outfits during his tenure, but it's not a match. It's not the same. It's a coat and a vest. The tie is not a tie he ever wore before. It's not the same look. It's the same general thing, but the specifics aren't quite right. And then there's, of course, Tennant's actual reaction. Sort of shock, confusion, possibly even borderline panic at realizing what face he has again. This is not supposed to happen. So that's the first thing. That does a bit to alleviate my concerns about this setting a precedent, because if this is approached and everything about how it is shot and presented in its initial form, as we saw in Power of the Doctor, that all leans towards the idea that this is not normal. So if we take this thing and establish it as a massive anomaly, as something that should not have happened and something that is not ever supposed to happen, then that removes the narrative idea that, oh, well, we can just do that again. Yeah, but no, it was completely established as anomalous before. So no, you can't just do it whenever. Now, that's not to say that it's going to be like impossible for some other writer or even Davies himself to theoretically come up with a reason that it could happen again. It's not like it completely locks it off, but it does mean that it's not something that can be done casually. If you're ever going to try and do this again, you're going to have to put work in, and that can be enough to dissuade this from being done loosey-goosey, or from the audience and the fans for asking for it to be done just because they want it. So that's already a good start. Next up is the fact that we already know this is a limited run. Tennant is getting 3 specials next year in 2023, and they have already announced who the doctor after him is, because we know about Ncuti Gatwa. We knew about Ncuti Gatwa before we knew that Tennant was coming back. So that also helps, because it's, again, making it clear and in the framing, this is something special. This is limited. This is not the norm or the new normal. This is something that we are doing kind of as a one-off. And we are already telling you what's coming after. Like, yes, this will be fun. We'll have these specials. And then you have this new thing to look forward to. So they've already managed to sidestep the issue of Tennant completely overshadowing whoever comes after him, partly because they announced who was coming after him before we even knew this. That, in hindsight especially, was an incredibly smart and savvy thing to do, to get people excited about Ncuti Gatwa before you bring in Tennant. Because if they found out about Tennant first, if that had either been announced first or leaked first or whatever, if we had known for a certainty, if we had seen the photographs of him on set with the TARDIS, with Donna, with Wilf, before Ncuti Gatwa's casting was announced, that would have been a disaster for the future of the show after these specials, because people would have been all excited and like, oh, he's coming back. How long will we have him? It'll be great. And then to be like, no, you're only getting 3 specials. That could have brought resentment. Instead, because they pitched Ncuti Gatwa first, told us that's who's next. Now, this is a special little treat before the thing we were already promised. That was really smart and would have been really easy to mess up just by putting those reveals in the wrong order. So again, kind of like what I talked about in the last video when I talked about the logo and the Disney Plus and sort of the initial marketing we're starting to see, it's well thought out. It's well planned. And I say that even acknowledging that the Ncuti Gatwa announcement felt like it was trying to get ahead of a leak. It felt rushed because it basically was just announced and dropped in answers to questions on a red carpet. There wasn't like a production announcement video like there was with Whittaker, or like a big reveal like there was with Capaldi, or even like a little specially filmed thing like there was with Matt Smith. So even though it felt like they threw together the announcement very hurriedly because they were expecting a leak to come out, they still knew to announce that first. That's big. That matters. Because I don't doubt Tennant was probably already signed on by the time that announcement was made. I think he probably would have had to have been. So there's a level of care that I'm seeing how this is being handled so far that helps, because my biggest concern about bringing back an old Doctor is that it feels careless. This is a careless idea being done with a lot of care that I just kind of assumed would never be applied to this concept. So that all helps a lot. Now, despite all the praise I've just said, I did say I'm kind of in a holding pattern on my full feelings because it's going to very much depend on what the story actually is and how this version of the Doctor is actually presented and approached. And this is where I'm going to bring in the fact that Russell T Davies in a comment actually called Ncuti Gatwa the 15th Doctor, which would make this incarnation the 14th Doctor, which means David Tennant is now the 10th Doctor and the 14th Doctor. And at present, I don't know how I feel about that. My like or dislike for that idea is completely conditional on what happens in the specials. Because if in terms of characterization and in terms of how he behaves, what he says, if everything about him is just an extension of the 10th Doctor, it's just more of exactly who that was, that's going to annoy me, calling him the 14th, because you're taking one Doctor and injecting him across multiple regenerations. And even if narratively the stories were, giving his second go a distinct numbering would bother me. But if there is some difference in the characterization, if there is some commentary and some introspection about what this means and how he reacts and responds to it in a way that is, I have no doubt, reminiscent of, but also distinct from the 10th Doctor, then I'll be okay with thinking of this as an independent entity. And again, that's completely conditional on what we're going to get, but I am provisionally hopeful, because you know what that outfit, not quite matching what he had before, signals to me, aside from emphasizing sort of the anomalous nature? That to me feels like an early warning. This is not going to be exactly how you remember him. I'm kind of hoping that what they're going to do is basically pull a Final Fantasy VII remake, which is an odd comparison for me to make, because if you saw my review of that game over in the Break Room of Geeks, I actually really didn't like it. But that didn't have to do with the narrative. That was a mechanical dislike for the game. But if you don't know, Final Fantasy VII Remake did something that was kind of divisive, especially when it first released, because it did largely follow the plot of the original Final Fantasy VII game. But there were definite and distinct narrative differences. New things were being added in. And in fact, the changes to aspects of the narrative was part of the built-in story. That's kind of what I'm hoping Davies is doing. And that's what I'm hoping that this outfit not fully matching is signaling. It's like, yes, at first glance, it's the same thing, but the closer you look, wait, it's not though. And I hope that that is a concept and a feel that gets expanded on and is the heart of these specials. Like, I'm sure they'll also tell entertaining stories in their own right, but thematically, I kind of want, I might even need that to be, if not the primary theme, a very distinct and clear one in this. Because Russell is not above making commentary on fandom and the state of the show. I mean, that's actually what Love and Monsters is. It didn't really work in Love and Monsters, but like, he's done that kind of thing before. And I could see this becoming something of a meta commentary on basically, you can't go back again. You can try, but it's not going to quite be the same. And maybe we should just move on. Will that be the distinct actual message? I don't know. I don't know. It might be, it might not be. But that's where I'm hoping he's leaning. And right now, what I'm seeing about how this is being presented gives me hope that that's where he's going. And so as a result, I am shockingly positive on an idea that on premise, I hate. And so here we are. Those are my feelings on Jodie Whittaker regenerating into David Tennant. What do you think about this? What do you think about what I've said, the idea in general? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. There are a ton of new subscribers in. I'm very glad to have you here. I definitely want to hear from you folks as well. Also, consider supporting the Patreon if you don't already. That's what enables me to do this as my living and to talk to you folks as frequently as I do, both here and in the break room of Geeks. But even if you can't support me that way, like, share, subscribe, those help too. But what I really want you to remember is you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. All right, time to thank my highest supporting patrons. Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfullah, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Oliver B., Melinda Walters, Emu Delkey, Leotha Boyd, Toy Loli, Becky Sparks, Phrenobulax, The Poodle, Zach, Bookworm, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperol, Adam R.D.L. Taylor, Shayla Gourlay, Brendan LaRose, and TT. Thank you for your support. If you want to hear me try and say your name while this little guy tries to chew on my earrings, well, you can check out the Patreon for the support tiers that get you a shout out. Thanks so much. You are a pain in my butt.